Welcome back to another PCBH corner, and unfortunately this morning we came in to do this corner and our light on our little stand, I guess that would be called, isn't working. So sorry if this is a little bit more darker than usual, but like PCBH, the show goes on.
Show must go on.
We're going to go on. And the topic today comes from a really robust Listserv conversation that was happening over this past couple weeks on CFHA, and it was on interrupting patients. And it's just another plug for people that, if you have topics that you think would be good for corners for us to discuss, please reach out. We watch those Listserv conversations and kind of like, oh, that would be a good one to have a corner about. So thank you for those that post on the Listserv, because that gives us ideas, and please reach out to us if there are other topics that people would want to discuss. So, interrupting patients. Where's your mind go?
Yeah, I think this is a perfect one for a PCBH corner because, and actually folks did really good on the Listserv of writing out their different, I try to say this, and here's where I'm coming from, and here's this journal article, and then the 3 E's or the triple E as another skill set, because it is a skill set. And that being said, I think that there's a lot more behind the conversation of interrupting. Because the very first question is it okay in general to interrupt? And then we got to think about maybe what folks were taught throughout their training. And what does it mean for the medical field? What does it mean for the mental health field? So there's a lot of things that come up. And like many things, is not always just the skill set behind it. And I know that you and I find ourselves saying this all the time. We can't feel gross about our work. If we somehow think that we're harming patients or giving them a less than setup by interrupting them, like, well, since we're in primary care, here's just another thing where we have to give them substandard care. Now go out there and see 12 patients a day. It's just not going to sit well.
I love so many different things that you said. One, let's take a contextual approach to this. Where are these things coming from? 2, I loved how much you framed it as a skill. And it is a skill. So many of these different things that we talk about within PCBH, particularly like visit interactions, we don't talk about enough how much it's a skill set to have to develop. There has to be intentionality, working on, and trial and error, and doing different things to iterate. And then I really liked the end point. Now my mind's going to lose me on this. What was the last thing that you said that was really, really great?
Not feeling gross, or that you have to believe. You have to kind of maybe the why.
Oh, that's what it was about. Yeah, the why and the context that's coming from. So when we do trainings and different things, and we ask people about like, hey, why did you get into this field? What's your value and stuff? I have not had anyone say, I got in this field to interrupt people. I've never had that. And one of the other things that we do,
quite the opposite.
Quite the opposite.
Because I just interrupted you.
Right, and again,
they came into this field to help people to feel seen and heard. So this could be rubbing up against.
And a lot of times we hear, people maybe describe their previous experiences with the medical system and feel dismissed and unheard. So it almost like really does bring this interesting thing that comes up about, what people are bringing in, their relational frames from past experiences, and then almost not wanting to, would perpetrate be the right word? Not to continue on maybe
perpetuate?
Thank you. Perpetuate.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you don't want to be you don't want to join the system and then do with the system, maybe something that you're like, hey, I had this experience, or my family had this experience. So when I go into the medical system, I want to make it more compassionate and help the person to be heard. And then once again, it's like, hey, here's the triple E. So go ahead and which I love the triple E. That's so great because it is a skill set. But once again, we do have to understand the why behind it, and we can't feel gross while doing it.
So I want to ask you that before asking you that. The one thing that I also wanted to highlight when we were doing this corner, as we talk about different skill sets, as we talk about different ways of approaching it, please, this is another time, and we're big on this, let's not have this conversation produce something that makes it easy to do. This is a tough thing to do, like interrupting people. And I think that's one of the things, as we talk about skills, as we talk about like, well, do this or approach it this way, there's almost like something that builds up. It's like, oh, this should be easy. And it's not easy. You and I, we could talk for days about how we struggle with this. So let's also bring that to the forefront, that just because we're going to talk about this way doesn't mean that it's easy in any way.
Yeah, and I would imagine, based on our other conversations, I'm assuming that what you're getting at is that even if you do practice the triple E's, and even if you do lots of trial and error and iterations, there's going to be times where you should maybe interrupt, but you don't. And the visit goes a certain way. And there could be times where maybe this was one of those times where you shouldn't have interrupted, and we're never going to get it all right. So I guess we maybe just get that just because we can't get something, it's like agenda setting. Just because you can't get something right every time doesn't mean that you throw away the entire skill. When we're doing skills, we're just trying to increase the likelihood that the visit is going to go in a manner that is useful for the patient, useful for the clinician's schedule to be able to help as many patients as they can.
There we say increase the probability.
Exactly.
And I really like how you gave both ends of the spectrum. There's going to be some times that we should have interrupted and we didn't, and there's going to be some times that we interrupted maybe when we shouldn't have. So let's go with the first thing, though, as we always say. What's the why behind this? Why is this a conversation that needs to be had? What does it bring up? What's the context to it? Where's your mind go there?
I mean, that's just such a loaded question, because in my head, as you asked that, I have a lot of the training that we did from acceptance and commitment therapy, how a lot of folks will launch into a story, and it's actually a form of avoidance. And so, as a clinician, you're like, oh shoot, am I perpetuating or being a part of somebody's avoidance story where we're not actually getting to something that's going to be clinically useful? And then there's all the stuff that runs through my head just about, practicality wise. So if I'm in a visit and there's other warm handoffs, and now because of my inability or unwillingness to interrupt, now I have 2 or 3 patients who went without care, where I could have done a good job with this person that was sitting in front of me and still gotten maybe 1 or other 2 other handoffs like in that sequence. But because I was unwilling to do that, I have to ask myself, did that patient get something more out of it? Or was the situation a little bit just more meandering, and now another person went without care? So there's just all these thoughts that are going through my head.
So almost like 3 things that I wrote down, and I'm sure there's more whys to this, but 3 that you said very well. One is just clinically, it may be an avoidance strategy that we are now reinforcing to continue.
Yeah.
Like if someone goes in, and we've talked about these, and especially working in a community health center, we hear a lot of different, just difficult life hardships. And you can almost see automatically like a narrative gets stuff that there's not a lot of emotion tied to it. It's just almost like the story is on repeat. And it's like that's avoidance, where we might want to kind of approach that intentionally. The practicality of it, as you said, like logistically, if I don't have a way of moving a visit forward, it's going to prevent me from seeing other people. Yep. It's going to make me run late. We're okay with running late if there's a tension behind it, but this would be almost like a passive running late.
Right.
And then it was the relational frames that I think we come in with, that it's like, and we've talked about this with other trainees and cores and stuff. It's like, oh, well, they needed it. They needed that, and it's like, Maybe, but how much of that is based on your old relational frames versus what is actually happening in the room and the experience? So that was really well done. Yeah, that was really well said.
The biggest epiphany that I've ever had with this topic was during our postdoc.
I was hoping you were going to go to the story.
And Dr. Strassel was shadowing me, and it was very early on in the postdoc. I don't even know if I quite knew how to use the electronic health record at the time. And we had just started doing the contextual interview, the love work play interview. And we had a patient who, was very emotionally activated and in lots of tears and was very upset. And I thought that I was doing what any good clinician would do, where I created a really soft, gentle, compassionate alliance. And, by the end of it, her tears had stopped. We were smiling. I don't remember if we had a plan or not. It feels like maybe we didn't.
Yeah.
About 45, 50 minutes later, the visit ends. There actually at the time, from everything I can remember, there wasn't another visit that we missed because of it. There wasn't a handoff coming through. So at the end of the day, I thought
Nailed it.
I thought it was pretty good in the grand scheme of things. She felt heard. She felt listened to. We didn't miss any handoffs. I wasn't that far behind. So, 45-minute visits, they happen in PCBH. We sit here and talk about how 45-minute visits happen in PCBH. And
just like a primary care visit will go longer than 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah, because that's what she needed.
Yeah.
So anyways, fast forward, we're debriefing, and, you know, Kirk's asking me, so what do you know about her? And I'm like, well, and I was able to name her job. What else do you know? Well, I know she cares about that job because the stress was surrounding the job. And asked maybe one or two more questions, and I realized I didn't know anything about her, about her context, other than the work environment. And I knew she was like a nice person. I knew she wanted to do a good job at work. I knew work was stressful. So, I had those components. But I didn't know what made her tick. I didn't know what got her up in the morning. I didn't know the family that was surrounding her, because I abandoned the contextual interview. I abandoned everything because of the tears. Which at the time, I understand where I was coming from, and I'm not going to be mean to my previous self. I didn't know. But Kirk looks me dead in the eyes, and he says, you got to understand, we have a moral and ethical obligation to be helpers. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I did.
Yes.
He's like, we spend all this time talking about context. And if you're looking at functional contextualism, you're looking at the ACT literature, so much of this has to do, and Kirk has a huge background in behaviorism, which obviously third wave cognitive behavioral therapy is a form of behaviorism. And we spend all this time looking at the function of behaviors, but we don't know anything about her context. We don't know anything about her situation. So if we fundamentally believe that the best way to help somebody is to know their context, know what a function of a behavior is, then how are we going to help this person if we don't know anything about them? And I sat there and my mind was absolutely blown. And he's like, exactly. So if we truly believe that there's a function to every behavior, that that knowing the context is going to be the most important thing, which was why we start with the contextual interview. And I know that this is controversial. A lot of folks, even on our own team, and I'm not, criticizing, this is just Bridget's personal view. I know that this is your view. That's why I don't start with the presenting problem. I start with love, work, play, because I fundamentally believe the most important thing that's going on is a person's life. And we are ethically obligated to help somebody, and how are we going to help them if we don't know about their life?
And I think this goes back to me, one of the best tips that I think people could take within this is that to be intentional with visits just from the beginning, right? And you're so 100% right. If we actually believed, if you really actually believe that context is paramount, that you have to place a behavior within the context to understand where the behavior is coming from. We can't intervene before we know that information. If we really, really believed that.
What would we start with?
Correct. It would be the contextual interview, and we would have to go through it in a systematic way to make sure that we're getting enough context that we can start to make some predictions, and we can start to assess some probabilities about what's going on.
And if we're going down rabbit holes,
exactly,
and a person is just going into their story, nothing, no criticism towards anybody. They think that this is what we want as clinicians. We want to hear the story, and of course, I want to hear the story. But like you said, it has to be intentional. So if we're just kind of having this rote situation where we're just, and then this happened, that is not therapeutic in and of itself. We have to be. That's why we're so keen on the contextual interview, is we're getting at different pieces of it. And people will say to us all the time, well, I got their whole story, and then I made out of, from it, I made the contextual interview. I'm not saying I've never done aspects of that. I do think that's part of it. But if we have a meandering situation on our hands, and then we're back piecing the contextual interview, you're not winning the pace. You're not winning the race. It's meandering. I would dare I say, it's not efficient, and that doesn't match the primary care.
And I think that's where I really loved what Sarah Ortner said, and Sarah's one of our colleagues, and we love Sarah. I loved how she even said, even in her introduction, which is another reason, a good tip, I think, be as proactive as possible within this regard of, one, as we say, let the person know, do the ADIT principles of acknowledging who they are and everybody in the room, introducing yourself, talking about the duration that you're going to be in, and
explain what's going to happen.
Explain what's going to happen, and at the end of the visit, do the thank you for the ADIT. And that explanation is really key, that I'm going to ask you questions to get to know you better. And I love what Sarah put in there even. And I forget, I'm paraphrasing here, but something to the nature of, hey, throughout this, I might interrupt you to make sure that we get this information, because my primary thing is I want to help you today. I want to be able to assist you. And I think that can go a long way. It almost is like level setting, that I might interrupt you to keep me moving forward.
And it's in the service of being the most helpful clinician that I possibly can. And like Kirk said, being ethically obligated.
Yes.
That this is so important that we need to look at this as a skill to get this right.
And what's really cool about that is that it almost makes like interrupting and keeping a visit on pace, it almost now starts to shift those relational frames that we might have come in with, where it's like, oh, that's cold, that's not person-centered and stuff. Actually, being intentional with the visit, gathering the context, interrupting to make sure we stay on the pace that we need to stay at, it actually turns into maybe the most person-centered thing that we could do, and a very helpful approach. So instead of feeling gross about it, it actually changes the relational frame a little bit about, it's like, oh, this is actually a benefit to do.
I mean, motivational interview is considered directive and patient-centered.
Yeah.
So you can be directive and patient-centered. So the way you just described it, absolutely. We're doing this. I mean, you think about what we're trying to do with primary care behavioral health, a moment at a time approach, or single session approach. So we're trying to make the most out of the moments that we have. And so engineering a situation that's going to get us that is to be able to get some ideas about the lay of the land and the context, to be able to understand, where, folks are coming from. So to me, when I go into a room and I'm working with a patient and it's a little bit more directive, again, which is not the opposite of patient-centered.
I love that you said it. I was going to say, I love that it's not an either or, it's an and. And I think that's a really awesome thing to be able to wrap people's minds around.
We are setting the precedent that I believe that we can do something important today. I believe that we can get something done. I believe that if we can just talk about what the situation is, that you as the patient are going to come up with something useful for your life. I'm going to help guide us there, but ultimately it's going to come from you, because I believe that people can start making change right away. And so you're setting that precedent. You know how you were saying about setting up the context? You're setting up the context that we're going to do something important. So from everything that you're about as a clinician, you're setting the stage that we are going to do something today. And as a behaviorist, and I know you are too, we're setting the stage in every possible way, and having this be directive to get the most out of what's going on in a person's life is saying, hey, when you walk out of this door, you're going to go do something in your life.
And what a cool, as you're saying, what a cool, almost like in the moment experiential kind of thing, what we're wanting you to do after you leave this room, we're going to do right now in this room. That's a really cool thing.
Sorry, that was a little bit meandering, but you got it.
Let's talk a little bit about some practical kind of suggestions within this, after understanding the why and the value and the purpose of we're not doing this to be mean, we're not doing this to be jerks. There's a purpose and a mission that actually we believe is really great patient care. So going into some practical tips, I think obviously, as we said, being proactive of setting the stage from the beginning can be really great. Working on the skill set about how to transition from question to question, I think is a really important one. I'd love to know where your mind goes within that, about how do you transition from question to question. I think inherent within this, and we don't have to go down this rabbit hole to talk about rabbit holes, but it is one of the things, how do you not go down rabbit holes? How do you not make sure that we're just sitting in a situation, a part of the context? I always love the analogy of Kirk used the metaphor of a dentist checking your teeth. And if the first tooth that he checked had a cavity, he wouldn't stop checking each individual teeth. He's going to make a note of it and then start coming back. And that's one of my favorite things to be able to say. It's hey, this sounds really important. I want to make sure to come back to that and transitioning to another question. Is there any tips or tricks within that realm of transitioning questions and making it sequential that your mind goes to?
There's so many, and that's why I love these corners, is because it seems like a really straightforward thing. Hey, should you be able to interrupt? It's yes. And then it's okay, so how are we going to do it? Here's the triple E, and here's some level setting. All really awesome tips. But as you get further and further into this, there's so many clinical skills that are important for why are we doing what we're doing, and how not to go down rabbit holes. That can launch me into a whole other thing where, at the end of the day, from a acceptance and commitment therapy perspective, or focused acceptance commitment therapy, I know what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
I'm looking for values. I'm looking for internal experiential avoidance of teams, and then the behavioral avoidance that follows. And then I'm looking for value congruent behaviors. So no matter what somebody's telling me, in my head, I'm like, okay, those are values, those are teams, that's avoidance behavior, and then that's a value congruent activity. So as we go through, I'm organizing it. So I think that's another huge plug to have very strong conceptualization skills coming into PCBH, because that helps me to not go down those rabbit holes.
That's a brilliant way of saying that. It's like having a strong conceptualization, understanding of human behavior from whatever theory that you're doing. Coincidentally would be a way of keeping a visit on track.
Yeah.
It would be a way of moving things forward, because you know what you're looking for. As you said, we're just not lost in the wilderness right now, just bumbling around. It's like there's purpose, there's structure, there's a mindset, a philosophy that's guiding.
Exactly.
Like, that's
and
good.
I think that
really
makes
good.
that sets the stage. So I think all the things that we're talking about, understanding the why behind it, really truly from like my depths of my soul as a clinician, believe that the most important thing is getting a snapshot of that person's life, because I think that's the best probability that I'm going to be able to help them. So now I don't feel gross about interrupting. And then clinically, when I'm piecing it together, I'd be like, okay, values, teams, avoidance. Then I know that to not take the bait. And not that makes it seem like a patient's trying to be, I don't mean it like that. You're not taking the internal curiosity bait for yourself as a clinician to go down a rabbit hole. You're kind of staying on task. And so once you do that, then the triple E, and then experimenting, like you said, and I want to hear how you do the trial and error and the iterations of phrasing different things, and then that transition work. So how do you do the transition work and the?
You know, one of the things that almost allows, I think, interrupting to happen has a higher probability of it being received by a patient is honestly genuineness. So I think part of the trial and error that I've done is being myself and trying to figure out how to be myself as much as possible. Just because if you think about it, if someone is being interactive with me, and as we've always talked about in previous corners, when there's curiousness done by a human, people are more flexible almost automatically. So if I'm curiously asking you, as well as bringing my humor into it, bringing my genuineness in it, it almost allows like something like interrupting to happen more naturally, more easily. So I think trial and error is just like, what style are you doing and how are you going about this? There's some really, I think, awesome moments that I have with patients where I just feel very slowed down. I feel very engaged with the person. I'm not actually having to say a lot of questions, but the visit is still progressing very much. And that comes through experience, I think. Just trial and error, like what questions. I think having fun and offering things such as like, I'm going to ask you this, tell me to shut the hell up if you don't want to answer this. Like putting in those little intentional humor, as well as inviting the person to interrupt you and to stop you, I think is a great way of normalizing, like we're moving forward, we might interrupt each other, and that's okay. As I said, the one that I love regularly is that, that seems really important too. I want to make a note of that to come back in the future. The other things that, two things my mind goes to, and then I'll pass it back over to you. One is Bob Rosenbaum's discussion about people respond to our experience. People respond to what we give. So if you and I are having a conversation, you're talking to me, I'm responding frantically, and oh my gosh, like you're going to respond frantically, and oh my gosh.
Right.
If I'm calm and I'm composed and I'm able to take the information, you're going to be calm and composed. So very much trying to watch my body just throughout visits, that I'm not ramping up as someone else is ramping up, because that is actually going to cause just both of us to ramp up and we're going to build off each other. So just being very mindful of that. And then I think lastly, and it's kind of two different tips and tricks with this. One is that, hey, if someone's ramped up, maybe try to have your calming presence to calm them down. And then almost sometimes it's like we have to, someone that's running really fast, we almost have to like catch up with them and then slow them down with us. So like if someone's not responding to my calm kind of approach, like they just keep going, like I might ramp up a little bit, like in how quickly I'm asking questions or my speech to get them to a point, and then I'm gonna I'm gonna intentionally start calming down my voice when I caught up to them to hopefully bring them back down to a more calming.
I haven't thought about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Again, and both sides can work. It depends on the context. One is someone might just respond to me being more calm and kind of more relaxed, and there's gonna be other times that I have to speed up to catch up to that person, and then we're gonna kind of come back down.
What happened? So when you, So when you say speed, I'm assuming it means they're going from like topic to topic to topic, and then so you're asking questions faster. You're matching their tempo. What happens with
100%? So it could be that I might throw out more questions quickly. It might be my pressure, my speech might go. I talk fast to begin with, so I might ramp that up even more. And then when we almost get to like a same level, like I'll intentionally start slowing down my speech. I'll intentionally start slowing down how I ask questions.
And they slow down with you?
Sometimes. Again, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think that's the thing. Like that goes back to the trial and error, trying these different things out. And the last tip that I always remember, you don't interrupt people when they exhale, right? Because if you interrupt them after they've exhaled, after they take a breath, you already lost. You start picking up the cadence when people are taking in breath, so you interrupt them as soon as they start to take that breath in. Because if you wait until they took the breath or the exhale, it's like it's back to that. So try to pick up the cadence of this person. Okay, they took I'm gonna interrupt right now. I'm gonna bring them back using things as we said. Hey, that sounds really important. I want to come back to ask about that. Tell me to shut the hell up with this question, whatever it might be.
There's 2 words that really stuck out when we were going over this, and that's being curious and being genuine. And I think that, knowing you, I guarantee you're able to get away with a lot of interrupting that maybe in the very beginning, when you started out as a clinician, in the very beginning, that you weren't able to get away with because you weren't settled in yourself yet as a clinician. Or maybe there was something about PCBH that you didn't know about, or you didn't believe in, or you thought maybe fundamentally went against, how the clinician you wanted to be. So, and then the genuine aspect. So when patients know that this isn't about your agenda, although I guess it's kind of ironic because it's my agenda, but it's my agenda about how I'm going to help you best, but that is the clinician expertise. So how it's always like a patient is the expert in their life?
Yes.
I'm in complete agreement. Well, then what makes us different than a friend? Mm-hmm. It's that we have expertise. So my expertise is that I know how to help you to help yourself. So I'm going to help you get there, but it's not my agenda. I'm not trying to change this person. I'm not trying to get them to do something that I want them to do. All of my techniques are all about helping the person to get in tune with themselves, so they can do the changes that they want to do for themselves. And I think when patients know that my entire agenda is for them to get in touch with how they're going to help themselves, they forgive it.
It is an irony, right? It's like my only agenda is you.
Yeah.
Like my only agenda is to get to know you and to help you in any way possible that we can.
Which is going to exude curiosity. And when somebody interrupts you, sorry, I just did that. But if somebody interrupts you because they're curious, that's so much. That's so much different than they're interrupting you because they want to go and do something.
I wish we had this at almost like the beginning, because this is such a great point. I hope people get to this point in the video, because that is such an incredible point. When there is that awareness, when someone knows that this person's all in with me, interruption, it's okay. It's not a big, but if someone's clinical, if someone's very, and again, I shouldn't do that. My mind's gonna beat me up for even saying that, but it's
buttoned up,
sterile and stuff. It's no, interruption almost becomes more amplified. It's more obvious. A lot of times, I would say when we interrupt people during our visits, people aren't even aware that we're interrupting. And I would even say sometimes I'm not even aware that I'm interrupting. I'm just in the flow and wanting to get to know this person. We're just moving it forward. It's not like I'm thinking to myself, it happens at times. I'm thinking, we gotta move forward. But most of the time, it's not that. It just is a casual conversation with intentionality.
And like you were saying about those genuine aspects, when I'm fully into the situation that's going on, I feel very comfortable to be like, whoa, hold up. I want to hear what you're going to say next, but can I just clarify this thing really quick? And so when they know that I'm all in,
yes,
then it doesn't feel like, oh, well, I didn't get to tell my story. It's like, oh, well, clearly Dr. Beachy thinks that this thing is important and wants clarification of it. So it just feels different.
Can I also add to that? What was the one thing that Kirk always said? If you had someone and we weren't really sure where we were going, and maybe there was people being verbose and we weren't really talking, which one of the pillars did he say to go to?
He said to go to aware.
Yeah, he said go middle, right? He said to go aware. And I think that's a great strategy too, that if you're feeling lost, almost in a sense, and the person's feeling lost as well, to be able, and I love doing this, like, can I pause you real quick? And that's usually what I do as far as like that overt interrupting would be like, can I pause you real quick? Which again,
that's a good verbiage right there.
Right. And
can I pause you real quick? That's very gentle.
And that goes back to the kind of the 3 E's, and let me see if I can do the 3 E's. Excuse, empathize, and explain, right? So it's like...
Excuse, empathize, and explain.
And that's almost kind of like what I would do there by, hey, can I pause you real quick? It's the first 2, and then I'm going to explain why. But then I love saying, can I pause you real quick? You know, you're saying these things, and my mind's just trying to predict right now. It's like, are you feeling anything right now that's coming up? Like, do you feel any emotions that are happening right there? And it's a beautiful actual intervention to be able to do, to get someone back into their body.
I was going to say back into their body, connected.
Aware.
Yeah, that middle pillar, because it's open, aware, engaged.
Yes, yeah. Sorry, that's just where...
No, that was
a drastic end.
No, yeah, just really abrupt.
And we're done, y'all.
Yeah. No, I mean, I really think the take-home message, and well, maybe we should craft that take-home message, is being genuine and being curious. I truly think that, which is why we're so passionate about functional contextualism and acceptance and commitment therapy, conceptualization to things. So it's not always just interventions, it's the conceptualization that I think is most beneficial from acceptance and commitment therapy.
No doubt.
Is because I truly do believe that everything that a person is experiencing makes sense. And so when I'm going into the room, I'm endlessly curious about how does this make sense? How does this manifest given what the person is presenting with? And it just puts me into a different mindset. I don't think of it as, well, I'm doing PCBH, so I know I'm talking out 2 sides of my mouth, because I said in the very beginning it was about being efficient, which it is. Yeah. But I don't feel any type of tension.
Yeah.
In my body of like
no imbalance. There's no imbalance.
Yeah, like I'm giving somebody a less than experience with me because, well, I'm in PCBH, so we got to be efficient. I just more look at it in the time of, or from the perspective that time is so valuable. And if you're meeting with somebody, let's make the most of this moment. Like everything that we're doing is about making the most of this moment so that I can then have more moments with other patients too. So you're maximizing. And somebody can look at that and be like, okay, so you're just trying to like efficiently get through a conveyor belt. And if that's what folks hear, I have empathy for that, but I can tell you that's not what my internal experience is.
It's not what an internal experience is, and I would also say it's not what our patients say that they feel like either. And I think that's a really important part of this, that, you know, my ending point would be having, as you said, like this understanding of the why that we're doing this. What is the purpose of us doing this? Having a really good conceptualization. Obviously, we're going to promote, you know, ACT or functional contextualism as that. And then try out things, iterate. And if you mess up, acknowledge it. Like if you interrupt someone and you're like, oh man, they're pissed right now, talk about it, right? I think there's such an interesting thing that pulls us away from our humanity at times. Like if I say something that I think pissed someone off, my mind, I'll be like, hey, like was that didn't go well, huh? like that I can see it always in your face, that didn't go well. Like have fun with it and try different ways out. And then I think that's, you know, as much as possible, when you can, get people to shadow you, to give you feedback about how that came across. I think that was one of the most beneficial things during our fellowship, right? Is how much we got shadowed by Kirk. And he gave us that direct feedback, like you said, you know, so next time it's like, all right, I'm going to try to do some stuff, like let me know how that comes across, how that goes. But always be iterating, always be working on those skills to build up.
The last thing I'll say is if you're out there in PCBH land, integrated care land, and there is something that's internally that feels like it's not right with the type of work, you feel gross about some type of work that you're doing, or maybe you feel gross about some of the advice that you were given, definitely don't hesitate to reach out to us. Because we can make a PCBH corner on something else and say, you know, well, what if this is the case or that is the case, or I feel like I'm giving less than care or whatnot, because there could be a way to problem solve it.
I love it. And I would also say with this, because as you were saying that, the one thing, I'm glad you said this at the beginning, we're not saying to not interrupt, or we're not saying to interrupt people so we never have 45-minute visits. Sometimes 45 minutes occur, right? And this is where these two things we want to just don't juxtapose, because it's going to feel gross if you feel like you're constraining someone when they should have more. That's not why we're saying to interrupt.
Right.
Not at all. We're saying we're interrupted because we believe in functional contextualism, that we want to get to know this person, that we're going to be intentional and efficient with this process, that the very thing that we're asking people to do outside of the visit, it's going to be represented in our visit itself.
That was a really good summary. So we should end there, because that was a really good summary. So reach out. I don't know. We may have made it more complicated.
Yeah.
You came to the corner thinking that you're going to get answers, but you're leaving with more questions.
And remember, it's not easy, and let's not promote it that way. But we do appreciate you stopping by, and as Bridget said, let us know where your mind goes. Take care.